The words didn't just hang in the air of my own kitchen. They poisoned it. "You smell like death, Mom," he said at my son. My Tyler, with the casual cruelty of someone commenting on the weather, not slicing open the heart of the woman who had raised him. His wife Nancy stood beside him, a silent, smiling statue of confirmation, her expression a mixture of pity and disgust. In that single brutal moment, I wasn't his mother anymore. I wasn't Margaret, the woman who had poured her life into this Cincinnati house, who had made it a home with the scent of her Sunday meatloaf and the warmth of her love. I was just a decaying object, a source of unpleasantness, a problem to be managed. They thought my grief over losing my husband had made me weak, that my quiet compliance in the face of their slow, creeping takeover of my life was a sign of senility. They thought they could erase me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a signature on a will that would grant them everything. They didn't know that what they saw as weakness was just the quiet gathering of a storm. They didn't know that while they were complaining about the smell of death, I was quietly planning to give them a taste of what it felt like to have their future die right before their eyes. He told me I smelled like death. He was about to find out what it felt like to be dead to me. It all started, as these slow-motion devastations so often do, with an act of love born from a place of profound loss. When my husband Frank passed away, the silence in our sprawling two-story house became a living entity. It was a constant, heavy companion that followed me from room to room, a suffocating blanket of grief. I was adrift in an ocean of loneliness, and the echoes of my life with him were a constant, painful reminder of everything I had lost. Tyler and Nancy, married for just over a year, were living in a cramped downtown apartment, perpetually complaining about the rent, their student loans, the general injustice of their starter life. My heart ached for them, and for the echoing quiet of my own home. My idea, born from a mother's heart that still yearned to nurture and to fix, seemed like the perfect solution for everyone. I would have company, the sound of life to fill the dreadful quiet. They would have a beautiful, spacious home, rent-free, a chance to get on their feet. I remember the day I offered it to them, my voice full of a hope that now tastes like ashes in my mouth. "Why don't you move in with me?" I'd said one Sunday over coffee. "There's so much space here. You could save money, get on your feet, and I wouldn't be so alone." Nancy's eyes had lit up, a flicker of something I mistook for daughterly affection, but now recognize as pure opportunism. "Oh, Mom," she'd cooed. "We couldn't possibly impose." Tyler, with his smooth practiced charm, had sealed the deal. "Margaret, you're a saint. We'll take such good care of you. You've done so much for us. Now it's our turn to look after you." I swallowed their promises like a starving woman. I believed them, because I needed to. I needed the noise, the life, the feeling of a mother again. I helped them move their boxes in, clearing out Frank's old office to make space for their things. I didn't realize I was not just making room for their furniture. I was beginning the slow, painful process of my own erasure. I was a willing participant in the dismantling of my own life, naively believing I was building a new one for us all. The colonization of my home began subtly, with 1,000 small cuts to my identity, each one disguised as an improvement. The first thing to go was Frank's recliner, the worn leather chair where he had read the paper every morning for 30 years. "It's just so bulky and dated, Mom," Tyler had said, his voice laced with a gentle pity that was more insulting than outright disdain. "We found a much more modern piece that will really open up the living room." The modern piece was a cold, angular sofa that was impossible to get comfortable on. I didn't say anything. I watched the delivery men haul away Frank's chair, a piece of my heart going with it. Next it was the wall, the family photos that lined the hallway, generations of memories from my wedding day to Tyler's first steps were taken down one by one. "We're going for a more minimalist aesthetic," Nancy explained, as she replaced a cherished photo of Frank and me with a generic mass-produced print of a fern. My history was being curated out of existence, deemed too cluttered for their new, streamlined life. My kitchen, once my undisputed domain, became a battleground. The recipes I had perfected over a lifetime, the dishes Tyler had begged for as a child, were now met with polite disgust. My meatloaf was too heavy, my fried chicken was too greasy. They embarked on a series of trendy, expensive diets, filling my refrigerator with strange green juices and foods I couldn't pronounce. The comforting aromas of my home were replaced by the smell of steamed kale and simmering resentment. I tried to push back, to hold my ground on the small things. "I like my curtains, Nancy," I'd say softly. "They were a gift from my grandmother." "I know, Mom, and they're lovely," she would reply, her tone making it clear they were anything but they just don't go with the new color palette. "We have to think about the overall look of the house." The house, not my house. The house. The language was shifting, and with it the balance of power. Every suggestion I made was met with a patient, weary sigh. Every preference I expressed was treated as a stubborn refusal to get with the time. They were experts at making me feel like the difficult one, the one who was stuck in the past, the one who was preventing our new family from gelling. I was being gaslit in my own living room, made to feel unreasonable for wanting to see my own life reflected in the home I had spent my life creating. The injustice of it was a constant, low-grade fever. I would retreat to my bedroom, the last bastion of my former life, and listen to the sounds of them rearranging my world, without my consent. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself this was the compromise required to have family around me. But the loneliness I had so desperately tried to escape was creeping back in, and this new version was far more insidious. It was the loneliness of being invisible, of being a ghost in the vibrant, modern home my house was becoming. The assault on my emotional space was quickly followed by a strategic and devastating takeover of my financial independence. It was a masterclass in manipulation, performed with the loving concern of devoted children. They sat me down at the new glass dining table, the one that always had smudges on it, and presented a stack of my own bills, with grave expressions. "Mom, we were just going through these, and we're worried," Tyler began, his voice a perfect symphony of sincerity and concern. "You have so much to keep track of. The mortgage, the utilities, your insurance. It's a lot for one person to handle." Nancy placed her hand on my arm, her touch cool and proprietary. "We just want to make life easier for you," she said. "What if we consolidated everything? We could open a joint account, and we can manage all the household payments from there. Your pension can be direct deposited, and you'll never have to worry about missing a due date again." My heart sank. Frank had set me up so carefully, ensuring I would be independent and secure for the rest of my days. My finances were my last vestige of my autonomy, the one part of my life they hadn't yet touched. "I'm perfectly capable of paying my own bills," I said, a defensive edge to my voice that I instantly regretted. "Oh, we know you are, Margaret," Tyler soothed, his tone placating. "This isn't about you not being capable, it's about us taking on some of the burden. It's what families do. We want to take care of you." They used my love for them, my desire for a harmonious family, as a lever to pry open my life. To refuse their help would be to accuse them of something nefarious. To admit that I didn't trust them, it would shatter the fragile peace. And so, worn down, and wanting to believe in the best version of my son, I agreed. The next day at the bank, Tyler did all the talking. He charmed the teller with a story about helping his aging mother with her estate planning. I signed the forms, my hand unsteady, adding both their names to my checking and savings accounts. And just like that, they had the keys to the kingdom. For the first month, they were meticulous. The bills were paid on time, but then the bank statements started to tell a different story. There were charges from expensive downtown restaurants, online shopping sprees for clothes in Nancy's size, a weekend getaway to a spa in Chicago that I certainly wasn't invited on. The withdrawals were disguised as household expenses, or family needs. But I wasn't a fool. I knew my money was funding their increasingly lavish lifestyle. I tried to confront them, my voice shaking, as I held up a statement showing a withdrawal of several $1,000s for home improvements. It had paid for the giant wall-mounted television they now watched every night. "Tyler, what is this?" I asked. "We didn't discuss this." "It's an investment in the property, Mom," he said, not even looking away from the screen. "It increases the value for all of us." The audacity of it left me speechless. My savings, The money Frank and I had scrimped and saved was being used to improve a house they were living in for free, and I was being told it was for my benefit. I was no longer a person, I was a resource. I was the silent involuntary financier of a life, from which I was being systematically excluded. I was paying for the very decor that was erasing me, funding the very lifestyle that was marginalizing me. The injustice of it all settled deep in my bones, a cold, heavy stone of resentment that I was forced to carry in silence. My world, which had once been filled with friends, hobbies and community, had shrunk to the size of the chair in my bedroom. The isolation tactics that Nancy and Tyler had employed became more brazen, more cruel. They no longer bothered with flimsy excuses. They simply cut me off. The house phone, which I now realized they had set up to forward to Nancy's cell when they were out, rarely rang for me anymore. On the rare occasion a friend did manage to get through directly, Nancy would often hover nearby, making it impossible to have a private or honest conversation. My best friend, Monica, was the most persistent. She knew something was wrong. She started showing up at the house unannounced, trying to bypass the gatekeepers. The first time she did it, Tyler answered the door. I was in the kitchen and heard his smooth, practiced voice. "Monica, so good to see you. I'm so sorry Margaret is right in the middle of a nap. She's been so exhausted lately." I was wide awake, holding a cup of tea, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run to the door and scream that I was a prisoner, but the shame held me in place. What would I even say? How could I explain that my own son was holding me captive? It sounded like the plot of a lurid television movie. Monica tried again a week later. This time, Nancy answered. Her approach was different, more insidious. "Oh, Monica." "Hi," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Mom's just having a bit of a confused day. Her memory, you know. The doctor said it's best to keep her environment calm and not have too many visitors. It agitates her." I stood at the top of the stairs, listening in horror. She was painting me as a senile old woman, incompetent and fragile. It was a lie designed not only to keep Monica away, but also to plant a seed of doubt, to discredit me in case I ever did manage to cry for help. The lie was a masterpiece of cruelty. It simultaneously isolated me and destroyed my credibility in a single stroke. After that incident, Monica's visits stopped. I couldn't blame her. She was trying to respect what she believed were my medical needs, manipulated into compliance by my own child. The loneliness became a physical ache, a constant companion. I had invited my family in to fill the silence left by Frank, but they had replaced it with a different kind of silence, a cold, menacing quiet filled with unspoken threats, and the constant hum of their disregard for me. I was completely at their mercy, and they showed my days fell into a bleak, monotonous routine. I would stay in my room until I heard them leave for the day, then creep out to the kitchen to make myself some toast and tea. I would spend the day tidying up the house, washing their dirty dishes left in the sink, folding their laundry left in the dryer. I did it partly out of a lifetime of habit, and partly out of a desperate, pathetic need to feel useful, to somehow earn my keep in the home that was supposed to be mine. They treated me like an unpaid, invisible maid. They would walk past me, without a word of greeting. They would discuss their plans for the weekend in front of me, as if I wasn't there. I was no longer Margaret, their mother. I was a fixture, a piece of furniture that occasionally moved and breathed. The injustice was a slow-burning fire in my gut. I had given them everything, my home, my financial security, my love. In return they had stripped me of my friends, my dignity, and my identity. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own creation, haunted by the ghost of the loving son I thought I had raised. The moment that would come to define my exile arrived on a crisp autumn evening. The air in the house was already thick with attention. You could cut with a knife. For weeks they had been treating me with a new level of disdain, their patience worn thin by my very presence. I was a constant quiet reminder of a life they were trying to overwrite, a debt of gratitude they had no intention of ever repaying. That evening, I was feeling particularly low. The grief over Frank's passing, which was always just beneath the surface, had washed over me in a fresh wave. I was sitting in the living room, in the uncomfortable chair they had chosen, just trying to breathe through the sadness. I hadn't been taking care of myself as well as I should have. I hadn't had the energy to shower that day. I was wearing an old comfortable house dress, The kind of thing you wear when your heart hurts too much to care about appearances. Tyler walked into the room. He stopped and stared at me, his nose wrinkling in a theatrical display of disgust. "What is that smell?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. I looked down at myself, confused. "What smell, Tyler?" I asked quietly. He walked closer, leaning in as if to inspect me, a scientist examining a distasteful specimen. He recoiled dramatically. "It's you, Mom," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You smell old. You smell like death." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. "You smell like death." He had not just insulted me, he had negated my very humanity. He had reduced me to a decaying object, a source of unpleasantness that was offending his delicate sensibilities. Nancy came to the doorway, a glass of wine in her hand, an amused, expectant look on her face. She had heard him. "Ty, don't be so mean," she said, but her tone held no conviction. It was a performance for an imaginary audience. "No, I'm serious," Tyler continued, warming to his theme. "It's spoiling my appetite. I can't eat in here with that aroma." He looked from me to Nancy, a brilliant, terrible idea dawning in his eyes. "You know, we should just eat in the kitchen from now on. It's too depressing in here anyway." Depressing, because I was in it, because my grief, my age, my very presence, was a pall over their shiny, happy life. From that day on, it became an unspoken rule. They ate their meals in the newly renovated kitchen, at the sleek breakfast bar they had installed with my money. They would laugh and talk, and drink wine, their lives a vibrant, colorful performance. Just a few feet away from me, I was expected to eat my meals alone, on a tray, in the living room. I was banished, an outcast in my own home, separated from them by an invisible wall of their disgust. I would sit there, eating my solitary meal of grits, or a sandwich, listening to the sound of their happiness, and the food would turn to ash in my mouth. The injustice of it was a constant, gnawing hunger that had nothing to do with food. I was being starved of dignity, of respect, of the basic human decency one should be able to expect from their own child. But as I sat there, night after night, a strange thing began to happen. The humiliation, the pain, the loneliness, it began to burn away the fog of my grief. It began to forge something new inside me, something hard and sharp and cold. They thought they were breaking me. They didn't know they were creating a weapon. They thought they were banishing a sad old woman. They had no idea they were training a silent, patient, and utterly ruthless general, for a war they hadn't even realized had begun. The daily ritual of my solitary confinement at dinner time became the crucible in which my new self was forged. Each lonely meal was a lesson in their cruelty, and my own resilience. I started to see them with a chilling clarity, stripped of the soft, forgiving filter of a mother's love. I saw them for what they were, two greedy, shallow and profoundly cruel people, who had mistaken my kindness for weakness, and my grief for an opportunity. And as my heart hardened, my mind sharpened, I was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of sadness. I was a strategist, and my home was a chessboard. I began to plan. My first move was to gather intelligence, because they saw me as insignificant, a piece of furniture that occasionally moved. They grew careless. They would leave financial documents on the kitchen counter. They would have loud, indiscreet phone calls about their mounting debts, and their creative use of my funds. And I, the invisible woman, listened and learned. I learned that Tyler's successful new job was a house of cards, a commission-only gig, that was yielding very little. I learned that Nancy had a shopping addiction, that was being funded almost entirely by my savings account. They were living a lie, a beautiful, expensive lie, and I was the one footing the bill. My next move was to secure an ally. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone on the outside, someone I could trust. The answer was Monica. I hadn't spoken to her in months, thanks to Nancy's masterful campaign of isolation, but I had her number memorized. I waited for a rare afternoon, when I knew Nancy and Tyler would both be out for several hours. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird, as I crept to the phone in the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to dial the number 3 times before I got it right. When she answered, her familiar no-nonsense hello was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Monica," I whispered, my voice a dry, cracking thing I barely recognized as my own. "It's Margaret. I need help." I didn't have to say more. She heard the desperation, The years of unspoken pain, in those few words. "Oh, Margaret," she breathed, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I knew something was wrong. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm at the house," I said, "but I'm not safe. Monica, they're starving me of my own life." The story came tumbling out then, a torrent of humiliation and neglect. I told her everything: the stolen money, the isolation, the constant insults, and the final crushing degradation of being told I smelled like death. Monica listened in horrified silence, her occasional gasps and muttered curses the only sound on the other end of the line. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, then she spoke, her voice no longer soft, but cold and hard as steel. "That miserable, greedy boy," she said, "and that worthless wife of his. Margaret, they are not getting away with this. Not for one more day. We are going to fight them." Her resolve was the spark I needed to ignite my own. The next day, Monica came to the house. She arrived under the guise of dropping off an old church directory, a plausible excuse that Nancy and Tyler grudgingly accepted. While they were distracted in the other room, Monica slipped me a small prepaid cell phone, a burner phone, she called it, and a piece of paper with a name and number on it. "This is a lawyer," she whispered, her eyes fierce. "Her name is Ms. Albright. She specializes in elder law. She's a shark. Call her. Tell her everything. I've already given her a heads up." That night, huddled in my small bedroom, I made the call. Ms. Albright's voice was calm, professional, and radiated a competence that was deeply reassuring. I told my story again, this time with the meticulous detail of a woman who had been preparing her case for months. When I mentioned the deed to the house was still solely in my name, there was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "They are fools, Margaret," Albright said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "They are arrogant, greedy fools, and that is going to be their undoing. You own the house. You have all the power. They just don't know it yet." The plan she outlined was audacious, terrifying, and beautiful in its elegant simplicity. It was a plan of quiet, legal and devastatingly effective warfare. We would not just get them out of my house, we would rewrite my will, hold them accountable for every dollar they had stolen, and ensure that their future was as bleak as the one they had planned for me. They had told me I smelled like death. They were about to find out what it felt like to have their inheritance die right before their eyes. The offer on the house came from a young family, who loved its classic charm and large yard. It was a full cash offer and they wanted to close in 2 weeks. The closing was a quiet, surreal affair at Ms. Albright's office. I signed the documents that transferred ownership of my home to a new family. The check I received was for a sum so large it seemed like a fiction, but it was real. It was the tangible proof of my reclaimed power. Now all that was left was the final devastating act of my quiet, meticulous revenge. We decided that the new owners would be the ones to deliver the news. It was cleaner, more final. They were not being evicted by a scorned mother. They were being displaced by the cold, hard reality of a legal property sale. The new family, the Wilsons, were scheduled to arrive with their moving truck at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. At 9:15 a.m. that morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom," Tyler's voice was a raw, ragged shriek of pure, unadulterated panic. "What did you do?" "There's a moving truck in the driveway. A family is here with a deed. They're saying they bought the house." I let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring his confusion, his terror. "I sold the house, Tyler," I said, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. It was my house to sell. I could hear Nancy screaming in the background, a wild, keening sound of disbelief. "You can't," Tyler yelled, his voice cracking. "This is our home. We live here." "No, dear," I said, my voice quiet but laced with steel. "You lived there, as my guests, and the party is over. The people on your porch are the new legal owner. They have a court-ordered notice for you to vacate the premises immediately. I suggest you comply." You planned this," he whispered, the dawning horror in his voice, the sweetest music I had ever heard. "You told me I smelled like death, Tyler," I said softly. "I just decided to stop haunting a house where I was no longer welcome. Goodbye." I hung up the phone. The queen had not just reclaimed her castle, she had sold it, disinherited the prince, and moved on to a new, more peaceful kingdom. The aftermath was a spectacular display of public humiliation. Tyler and Nancy were forced to frantically pack their designer clothes and minimalist furniture into a rented U-Haul, while the entire neighborhood watched. Their kingdom,
built on a foundation of my stolen money and their boundless arrogance, had been publicly dismantled in a single morning. They were forced to move into a cheap extended-stay motel, their credit ruined, their social standing in tatters. They had tried to erase me, and in the end, they were the ones who had been rendered homeless and insignificant. I sit on my new balcony now, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and I watch the sun rise over the Ohio River. My life is small and beautiful, curated not by my son's aesthetic, but by my own sense of peace. I bought a lovely, manageable condominium in a quiet complex with a community garden and a library. It is not the large house of my past, but it is a home and every inch of it is mine. I have reconnected with Monica and I have our weekly bridge games again, and the laughter is a healing balm to my soul. I have found new purpose. I used the money from the sale of the house and the assets I reclaimed to establish the Margaret Foundation, a non-profit that provides legal aid and emergency housing to elderly victims of familial abuse. My son's greatest insult has become my life's most meaningful. I have not heard from Tyler or Nancy directly since their world imploded. I heard through the grapevine that they eventually divorced. Nancy apparently moved to Seattle to start over. Tyler is still in Cincinnati working a menial job, a ghost of the successful man he so desperately wanted to be. A few months ago, I received a letter, forwarded from Monica. The handwriting was Tyler's, a shaky looping script. It was a long rambling letter, filled not with apology, but with a litany of his own hardships. His life was so difficult. He was so lonely. It ended with a single stunning sentence. After everything, I think you owe it to me to help. I read the letter, and then I did something the old Margaret would never have done. I laughed. A real deep, genuine laugh. The sheer unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. I took the letter, walked over to the paper shredder Monica had given me as a housewarming gift, and I fed it into the machine. I watched as his words, his entitlement, his complete lack of self-awareness, were turned into a meaningless confetti of paper. My help, my love, my resources, they were no longer his to claim. I had found new places to invest my heart. I had found myself. My story is not one of revenge. Not really. It is a story of reclamation. It is the story of a woman who was told she smelled of death, and chose to be reborn. It is a story about the quiet, unshakable power that comes from knowing your own worth, even when those closest to you have forgotten it. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. And as I watch the morning light spill across my garden, I am filled with a profound and lasting peace. He told me I smelled like death, but I was the one who was truly finally gloriously alive.